Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this collaborative masterclass where we'll be looking at how we lead effectively in a hybrid world. I'm Kevan Collier. I'm the strategic lead for Learning and OD at Northwest Employers, which is one of the partners within the collaborative. Just a little bit about housekeeping first of all. Again, if we can, please keep our mics on mute, just so the presenters aren't interrupted by any background noise. That will be great. The session will be recorded, so just to let you know that we will be recording the session in case there's anybody who has any objections to that. And again, the session will be interactive, so there will be a breakout room during the first presentation. So just a bit about the collaborative. So the collaborative is made up of a number of organisations across the Northwest. We came together a number of years back and pooled our resources and our knowledge to ensure that we could provide the best possible information and content to all of our members. The collaborative is made up of ourselves, Northwest Employers, the NHS Leadership Academy, AQUA, MIAA, and Northwest ADAS. And together we can share the information that our members require in relation to people management and organisational development. So today we'll be focusing on leading effectively in a hybrid world. This is obviously a topic that is really important to us in 2020. Obviously, through COVID, we had to respond very quickly to working in a different way and becoming more agile in how we operated as organizations. With that, obviously, we've moved out of COVID, but we still have that legacy of hybrid working. And what is best practice is really the question. What is best practice in the way of leading in a hybrid world? There's not a huge amount of research within this area, and a lot of the research that we do see tends to be limited to opinion pieces in HR magazines, etc. So today we'll be really focusing on what are some of the more credible sources of evidence saying around working and leading effectively in hybrid work. And the session will run through with two presentations. We have Juliette Alban-Metcalfe and we have Stephen Whitehead with us. I will do a quick introduction into the presenters as we go. But as I say, we won't be having a break during the session. So please, if you do feel that you need to take 5 minutes, please feel free to leave at any time and join us once you're refreshed. So, quick introduction to our presenters today. So we have Juliette Alban-Metcalfe. Juliette is a chartered occupational psychologist and she's the chief executive of the Real World Group. She's the author of numerous peer-reviewed papers and book chapters relating to leadership, teamwork, and EDI. She has an MSc in Occupational and Organisational Psychology and an MSc in Positive Organisational Development and Change. Juliette is currently completing her doctorate in Effective Leadership within Hybrid Teams, and she also helped establish the Real World Group's assessment for engaging transformational leadership. She currently works across the UK, the USA, and Southeast Asia, supporting organisations within these areas, and is the co-chair of the UK government-sponsored Thought Action Steering Group. Stephen Walker-Whitehead began his career in libraries and arts. He was quickly seconded to trade unions in the 1990s, where he was one of the youngest branch secretaries in the UK. He's enthusiastic about positive industrial relations and has a desire to make the workplace as positive as it can be so that people can flourish and reach their potential within the workplace. He's held several heads of service roles within the areas of people and OD and worked for charities such as the Citizens Advice Bureau. He joined Hounslow Borough Council in 2019 as the Director for People, EDI and OD, and is also the co-chair of London Borough Council's HRD group. He's a specialist in industrial relations and pay equality, and has also co-authored many articles and book chapters within his areas of expertise. So just a bit about our presenters this morning. So without further ado, I'll invite Juliette to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Kev. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juliette. Welcome.
Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Kev, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, brilliant. Great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to, so that I don't forget, I'm going to start sharing my slides straight away. So I don't know if anyone's had this before, where you start talking and someone puts in the chat, should you be sharing your slides? So to avoid that, I'm going to start sharing them straight away. Okay, so here we go. Getting more used to Teams these days. It's funny when you have to swap between these two things. Okay, so I believe I'm sharing the slides. Okay. So as Kevin said, I'm a psychologist. So and my doctoral research at the moment, which is it's taking forever because I'm so busy. We're so busy at work. Is around effective leadership of hybrid teams, because I've always been really passionate about leadership, day-to-day leadership. What makes a difference between people who create a fantastic experience at work, who really empower you, make you feel engaged, motivated, committed to your work, that reduce your job-related stress rather than increasing it. And what's the difference between those people and the people who can have a really negative impact on our careers, our working lives, and as a result, of course, our lives in general. And so that's what I'm going to, so that's kind of led me to all of the research we've done in leadership over the years. And just before lockdown, when I was thinking about wanting to do a doctorate and thinking about what the topic would be, I'd always had an interest in remote working and always wondered what if any was there a difference between virtual team leadership and in-person team leadership. And that with COVID, of course, and the significant explosion of hybrid working, that's then become a natural thing to study. So that's how I ended up doing that. So what I want to do today is talk to you about that. But I'm going to be answering the key learning objectives, or answering the questions in the learning objectives of the session through not just my doctoral research, but also through the ongoing literature reviews that I'm undertaking. And as Kev mentioned, you've probably noticed that an awful lot of what we're having to rely on as received wisdom around hybrid working and hybrid team leadership is actually more opinion than research. So I'm going to try and sort out what is the actual evidence. So today's learning objectives, the first one, and you'll be familiar with these, of course, from the publicity around today's event, but how can we ensure people are performing well when we can't see what they're doing? Now, this isn't, what you'll recognize as I'm talking today is that these aren't challenges that are unique to hybrid teams. These are challenges that in-person teams have as well. So hopefully what you'll find is that it's beneficial for all of the teams that you work with. So first of all, how can we ensure good performance when we can't see what people are doing? Excuse me. How can we keep people motivated and engaged in meetings when they're not in the room? Another one of the common challenges. How can we have a good team spirit without the casual conversations in the office or at the water cooler? This is one of the most popular questions people have around hybrid working. How can we sort of recreate that relaxed, and spontaneous communication culture that we can have when we have more of an in-person team in the hybrid environment? And basically, this is an incentive for you to stay to the end of my presentation. Is right at the end, I'll summarize what the key things are. The bottom line is there's no silver bullet around this, as much as we'd love there to be. There's a number of different things you need to put in place that will enable that to emerge. And then the other objective is around how can we support people's well-being when they're working remotely? And this is really critical, of course. I mean, all these things are critical, but this one I think is particularly critical because even before COVID, people were incredibly stressed in the workplace, and work-related stress was regarded as the pandemic of the 21st century. So, and what we've learned about hybrid working is that sometimes leaders aren't equipped to do it. They can end up causing more stress than relieving it because they're not sure what to do. So this is a really critical one for us to focus on. And I'm going to particularly feedback some research around hybrid teams and well-being at the beginning of my presentation. So I thought it'd be important though that we start by putting the session into context because, you know, you might have colleagues who don't like hybrid working. You probably hear people all the time saying, "I wish people were back in the office." You know, it is common. We hear it, not infrequently. And so, there's always news pieces in the various OD and HR journals saying, "Is this the end of hybrid working, or this spell the end of hybrid working?" or an idea coming to an end soon. So let's start by setting it into context. And there are indeed, and I'm just using this title, the haters, just because it's always fun to use millennial phrases, isn't it? But those people that, there are lots of people, lots of organizations as well, who are not keen on hybrid working, and they're getting less keen as time goes on. So there was an example of a piece in HR magazine in January 2024, which was reporting that one of the leading law firms was saying that they were going to name and shame hybrid workers. They're obviously not keen. There's also a piece of research by Langley James, which was at the end of the year before, saying that 2/3 of CEOs in their sample would like to remove hybrid working within 3 years. The CEO of Goldman Sachs went even further and said it was an aberration that they're going to correct as soon as possible. And then you've also got people like Google, like Amazon, Disney, and so on, who are reported to be backtracking on former hybrid working processes that they were happy to embrace before. And Google's even going so far as to including people's in-person office statistics in their performance reviews. So there is definitely, in some parts of the world, in some industries, there is a rolling back of hybrid working. But isn't it interesting when you look at those different types of organization that are backtracking? You might argue there's a correlation between organizations that haven't been known for taking much interest or not, certainly not been, excuse me, at the forefront of being concerned about employees' needs and employees' well-being over company needs, and in fact, perhaps not even interested in societal needs. There might be a correlation there between that and the fact that people are rolling back, organizations are rolling back hybrid working because they see it as not suitable. The reality is that the number of job searches around hybrid working is increasing rather than decreasing. So let's look at the facts then. So those are some of the people that the organizations, I should say, organizations that are not keen. But the reality is that actually increasing organizations, according to CIPD, believe it's important to provide this flexible working. And of course, hybrid working is part of that. They found that 83% of organizations that they surveyed had hybrid working in place. And of course, we know that in the public sector in particular, it's incredibly widespread. It's not going to be going anywhere. They found that 45% had a formal policy, 24% had an informal approach, and 13% were developing policies. And what you'll see as I talk about it today, you really do need to have formal policies if you don't already, and really, be continually working to improve those and enhance them as you learn what different challenges people have and what they need support with in order to be most successful in this arena. They found that 52% of organizations require a minimum days in office, 46% don't. And just to back up what I said earlier on about, actually it's not necessarily, it seems to be more driven by this belief by organizations that non-hybrid working or in-person working is better, rather than any sense of what employees want. And a piece of research recently from Bloomberg Intelligence found that 73% of workers in London would leave their job if they were no longer able to work hybrid, basically. So that's the bottom line. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So we really need to upskill our leaders, upskill our people, support our teams as much as we can to enable them to be successful in this way, because the benefits are enormous if we can overcome the challenges. Now, I want to start with a piece of research I mentioned just now about hybrid working and well-being. So, piece of research hot off the press. It's from Liverpool John Moores University by Dale and colleagues. And what they wanted to look into, they did a qualitative survey of 412 people to understand how organisations can be proactive in supporting the health and well-being of their hybrid workers. And what they found in their study, from speaking to all these people, was that won't surprise you to hear that they found hybrid work was good for enhancing physical health, work-life balance. So people were able to spend more time with their families. They were able to get, life admin done because they were in the home. So they were able to, hoover if they wanted to during their working day. They were able to take a break to put the washing on, those kinds of things. They experienced reduced stress and anxiety. However, we've got to be considerate as well of the other side of things, which is that hybrid work can also, if not, thought about carefully, if not, approached effectively, can be detrimental to people too, because of the fact that it can cause more isolation, of course, of people. People can feel more, on their own, and it's not for everybody. But in this particular study, they found that some of the disbenefits can be isolation, the fact that you're sitting at your desk more than you would be sort of getting up and walking around the office, perhaps, which can of course lead to physical issues as well, and also this thing around what they're calling an extensification. That it can really lead people to challenges around boundaries and when it's okay to switch off, and lead to people working much longer and much longer hours than they would do otherwise. And as I'll talk about later on, one of the other things we need to be mindful of is giving people breaks between meetings, because that is another challenge. We just tend to do things much more back to back now when we work hybrid than we would do in person. But you won't be surprised to hear that they concluded that overall the well-being benefits to hybrid working massively outweighed the challenges that were faced by people. And they noted that more than 25% of people who responded to the survey said they had zero challenges with hybrid working. So there's some interesting, very recent research on it. So of course you can imagine that a lot of this, a lot of what makes hybrid working successful or not is the same as with any scenario in an organization. It comes down to leaders and what leaders are doing. And so, as I said, my research is going to be looking at what leaders do specifically, and a large amount of the research is undertaken in local government. So it's highly relevant to the work of and related sectors as well, I should say. So very highly relevant to people on the call today. So the question is, how can we create a win-win between organisations and people? How can we help our people get the most out of hybrid working so they're being maximally, effective and performing as well as they can, but at the same time, they're experiencing greater well-being, greater motivation, lower job-related stress? And I'm going to answer that through I've summarised 5 of the strong themes that have emerged from my doctoral research. And I'm going to supplement it with other people's research, and basically talk to you about these 5 different themes that are absolutely worth paying attention to. So the first one is the critical importance of ensuring high performance without visibility, because of the fact that you manage by outputs rather than by control. Now, there's memes on each of these 5 themes that I hope will bring a smile to your face. But as this diagram or this meme shows, this is not a new issue. What COVID did, what this enormous shift to hybrid working overnight did, was it exposed the gaps and in some cases chasms between the kind of leadership that we have in organizations and have in our teams and what we need. That there was already a gap between those two things, and like I said, in some places a chasm. So this isn't something that's unique to hybrid teams, but it is of course particularly critical for hybrid teams, and we've got to stop this over-reliance on things like monitoring software and things like that, because those are absolutely counterproductive in the stress that they cause. So what did I find from the research around this? So successful hybrid leaders manage by outputs rather than by visibility of work. They also try to be relaxed in doing this around people's hours of working. So what that means is, as that study by Delatel showed, the people that were, happy and felt more well were ones who were able to flex to do a school run if they needed to. They were still doing their hours, they were still doing their work, but they had that flexibility around what they did. They might pop to the gym at lunchtime or go for a walk or something like that, but they had that flexibility. They were allowed to basically set their own agenda when it came to their day-to-day work, as long as they were getting their work done. And also, the most successful hybrid leaders tried to allow people to make their own choices about how much they'll be in the office. Now, the caveat to that has got to be that it's got to suit the needs of the team. Okay, it's got to be such that the job can get done, and also that it doesn't detrimentally affect team members and team colleagues. And I'll talk more about the importance of collaborating and coordinating people as we go through the different themes. So they try to allow people to make their own choices as much as possible. Now, of course, the key foundation for managing by output is that you trust people, and also that they feel psychologically safe, that if, they make a mistake, when they're not being, overtly supervised, or if they, they feel that they've got some suggestions about how to do things better, or they feel like they can, introduce their own suggestions and thoughts about things. And if it doesn't work out perfectly, they're not going to get a finger pointed. It's going to be a conversation rather than an immediate, well, you screwed that one up. So psychological safety and trust are key foundations to this. It won't surprise you to hear that the American Society of Human Resource Management found in their big piece of research that 70% of people said that feeling empowered to take action when things arise keeps them fully engaged at work. So we've known for many decades that people feeling empowered and feeling that they have some control over their lives and their working lives is important. But for some reason, we don't necessarily pay attention to that when it comes to our workplace. So we need to keep reminding ourselves and our leaders about the critical importance of giving people that latitude. We've got to shift from where we've been traditionally to leading by results. And so the question is, from a practical perspective, are you genuinely comfortable with allowing your team to, get on with things as long as they produce the right results? And how do you know that they feel fully trusted? Something to think about, something perhaps to explore with your team. And also with other leaders you work with. The leaders that might be, leaders in the teams that you manage, do they feel comfortable with that? And you need to explore that, find out whether that's true or not, that people do feel genuinely empowered to do their job, feel trusted, and so on, as appropriate. It's also important to think about watching out for all forms of presenteeism. I think, unfortunately, in many organisations, in my experience, because of the lack of sufficient formal policies, or of course, we'll know this very much as people who are interested in organisation development, policies are ignored by leaders, in favour of their own preference for how they want to work with their teams. We really need to watch out that people aren't being allowed to make their own rules around presenteeism, because it will destroy motivation. It won't get the results that you want. And that's, either how much people are in the office being dictated to them in an inappropriate way, or their hours being too much controlled. The question is for people who feel like, actually, I don't have a team that I can delegate to right now, is okay, if you don't feel like your team is sufficiently competent, if they don't do the right stuff when you need them to, explore why not. It's not always going to be the case that we have highly effective teams. We might have new team members. We might have, inherited a team, or we might not have addressed performance ourselves. But this is the best time to start doing that is now, and that's not an excuse. Are we exploring really why people aren't doing what they're supposed to do? Is it about clarity of expectations that we're communicating to them? Are we not being clear enough? Are we checking that with them? Is it their competence in a certain aspect or certain aspects? Is it their confidence? Or is it a question of the wrong job? All these things need to be considered before leaders can truly say, well, I've tried my best. If you haven't really explored that, then you haven't tried your best yet. And are your team psychologically safe? And the biggest question of all, how do you know? You might feel psychologically safe, or you might not, but you won't necessarily know if other people do unless you ask. So it's critical to find out about that, because it's not just psychological safety, as you'll know, is not just important for hybrid work, it's important for all work. The next thing is about the importance of fairness. So really key to motivation is that people feel that they're being treated fairly, and that fairness is being embedded in how people are working in that hybrid environment. Again, not something that is unique for hybrid working, but it is particularly important. So what my research found was that successful hybrid leaders are absolutely firm about people coming in when they need to be. So what that means is that, and unfortunately, the reality is we can sort of see that even, well, we've seen examples of even where executive teams in organisations agree that on a certain day of the week they're going to be there together. And then one or two members of this team sort of think, well, I don't, actually, for some reason they think they're special and they don't need to be. Now, if their executive team is role modelling, not sticking to the rules, then why should anybody else? But it's not just, of course, about executive teams, and they might be doing the right thing. All the senior managers might be doing the right thing. But if people aren't showing up when it was agreed, then it's important that that's addressed. Okay. The most successful hybrid leaders were also described as being firm about fairness. So what that meant was that if people were taking the mickey, if people were, for example, saying that they couldn't come in to an agreed meeting that had been scheduled because of their sister's, friend's dog that they'd agreed to take to the vet. Not that I don't love dogs, and I've got one myself, they're great, but you can sort of see that we found people using very tenuous excuses not to come into the office, and they weren't being challenged. Or it might be that people were saying, well, actually, I don't have childcare on a certain day. Well, if you're working that day, that's not acceptable, So it's really important that people are supported as line managers, particularly those who, are less confident in performance managing, that they have the guidance, they have the support, they have the policies and procedures to fall back on, that they can be fair about these things. And you'll be looking forward to hearing Steve talk later on about some of the brilliant ways that Hounslow is making hybrid working a success. They also ensure that they don't. So the most successful leaders are the ones that ensure that they focus sufficiently on people who aren't present as often, because we all have people who prefer to be in the office for whatever reason. It might be that their home isn't conducive to working, or that they need to see more people, or there could be all kinds of different reasons why people might, even given the choice, prefer to be in the office. And what that can lead to is this phenomenon called proximity bias. And proximity bias is something that psychologists describe. And what it means is that when we see people regularly, when we're exposed to them more often than other people, our brain's always looking for shortcuts because there's so much to process all of the time. One of the things that we will do is we will naturally, give more opportunities, trust more those people that we see more often. It's just it's an imperfect part of our brains, but for our brain, it makes sense. I see this person regularly, I know Anne, we talk often, I'll give her this job to do, I'll give her this opportunity, I'll ask her to do this. But that's proximity bias, and that's really bad news, as you can imagine, because hybrid working can, of course, in many ways level, the organisation in terms of, marginalised groups and their opportunities in work, but it can also, people with care responsibilities, there's different types of different types of people, but it can also create greater unfairness if we're not careful. And that proximity bias we've got to be so careful about. Related to this, the most successful hybrid leaders go out of their way to include others. So they might, for example, make sure that even those meetings that are in the office, if not everybody in the team is there, they'll always be online. So basically, people will have the opportunity to log in and join a meeting, even if they're not able to make it to the office for that particular one. They'll make sure that they make use of technology, like, for example, something basic like SharePoint, so that people can see things like version control and can track where things have, how things have moved forward, even if they weren't present in those particular conversations. So that's really, really critical. So some practical things for you to reflect on then, either as, a leader or with the leaders that you work with. Think about with your team, who does the current way of working work? Sorry, I can't read my own notes. Who does our current way of working work well for? Now, this is the other thing, like, this fairness in all directions means that you want to make sure that, you're being fair to your team in terms of what you're expecting and how you're holding to account. You also want to make sure your team are being fair to each other in how they behave, but also are your team being fair to you? Because what we often see is hybrid leaders who are absolutely, wrapping themselves in knots, trying to meet everybody's needs apart from their own, and that can only lead to burnout. So it's a question of getting that balance between those three parties, two parties, you and your team with each other. So have a reflect on how did your current way of working suit? Who does it suit? And does it suit everybody, or does it suit nobody, or does it suit some parties above others? How confident do you feel tackling people who aren't behaving fairly? And if you're in the position where you're working in HR or OD, are you providing managers with clear guidance and the support that they need when people aren't doing what they're supposed to do? Because of course, guidance is one thing, but you need to help to bring it to life and perhaps coach them through tackling challenging people. Are you perhaps guilty of proximity bias? Have a really good think about that. When I was looking at well, actually it was an opinion piece in this case by a solicitor's firm around some of the things to think about from an HR legal perspective. Of course, proximity bias could lead to claims of discrimination. So you really, really need to be careful about that. If for no other reason other than the legal ramifications, you want to think, of course, it's not going to create engagement, motivation, and commitment if people see that you're like that. The bottom line is it could land you with a claim. And how can you help other people to avoid this error? If you run a team of leaders or you're a very senior leader, how can you make sure that you're holding people to account for not being guilty of proximity bias themselves? The other thing that relates to it, and strongly linked to this fairness thing, is this bit about appreciation. And we cannot show appreciation to people enough when they're doing a good job. Of course, I don't mean toxic positivity or whatever the phrase would be, where we're kind of just saying thank you to people. We don't really mean it, but we feel like we need to do it. When people are doing a good job, that's where we need to make sure that we go out of our way. And it's not enough to say, oh, people know that we appreciate them. It doesn't matter even if they do, they still get a boost when we say thank you, we've noticed you. And this appreciation thing can be more challenging when you're working in a hybrid environment. But it is critical to do it in order to maintain motivation and commitment of people. And of course, as I said before, it can be more challenging because you might have to go out of your way to notice what people have done and how they've contributed. And particularly when it comes to being mindful of not noticing just those people who shout loudest about what they've done. You really need to go out of your way to find out what it is people have been up to, what they've been in a positive way, and what they've achieved, and having the opportunity to thank them for that. And later on, I'm going to talk about the importance of maintaining regular contact with people. The part of that will give you the opportunity to find out what they're doing and demonstrate appreciation if you're not already. So the third theme is around how do we enhance connections and potential of our team members? Of course, the answer to that is that they're actively empowered, not just as individuals, but also as a team. So what my research found was that it was really important when people were successful that they promote a bespoke approach to office presence. So I've alluded to this already. They allow teams to make their own rules about what works. So it is really important that your team gets together and discusses what works for them and then revisits it, because it might work for a time being, or there might be times of year when it works more or less, depending on the cycle of work. There might be challenges that come up that mean that you need to be together more often. There could be all kinds of different fluctuations in that. So it's not something that you do once and then that's it, you've done it. But it is important to bring the team together to agree that, rather than you as line manager saying, well, it'd just be easier if I just agree what we're going to do. You need to, like with everything else, if you want people to genuinely commit to something and to be motivated by it, you need to build a shared vision with the team of how they're going to make that work together. The other thing that's really, really important is we can't leave it to chance that people are going to collaborate in the office, that they're going to be together, that they're going to have chance to connect. We need to coordinate people being in the office. Now, of course, that links to the team agreeing what their way of working will be, but you can't leave it to chance, because that has got as much likelihood of failure as success. Perhaps it might be more likely to fail given people's preferences in your team, but always around, we've got to work to coordinate people being in the office. It's also important that we're not just as organisations imposing on people, what we want them to do from now without consultation, because of course people will be quite rightly, frustrated, incredibly annoyed if they've been promised something that you wanted to do because you as an organisation wanted to be able to reach wider talent, say for example, or because you didn't know what you were, you weren't quite on top of things, and perhaps they were recruited during COVID or closely after, and their employment contracts don't reflect what you're asking them to do now. It's not going to motivate people or get them to do what you want to do by just telling them what they need to do. Of course, it's got to be a balance, and the more that you can, involve people in at least raising objections or concerns before you implement something, and really genuinely listening to that, the better, even if it has to happen. Related to the coordination thing, and to that as well, of course, is that some of the losers, and this is often an argument used against hybrid working, are those people who are in their early careers, or perhaps they're new to an organisation or new to a team or new to their role. And the reality is that when you look at the research around this, and this is also what I found, was that it doesn't have to be that way. You can absolutely onboard new people and develop talent even when you have a hybrid team, but it has to be thought about carefully. It has to be coordinated. You have to create opportunities for learning rather than leaving it to chance. And it's really important too, according to people in my research, that they are helped to make time in the office as productive as possible. So coordinating people being in the office is really important, but also it's important to agree, well, what activities are we going to be undertaking when we're in the office together? Because if someone just goes into the office and then is on Zoom calls all day or Teams calls all day, then that kind of defeats the purpose. You've got to make sure that you have scheduled meetings, that the right people are turning up. So going back to what I said before, that if people have agreed they're going to be in a meeting to coordinate, collaborate, and so on, making sure that people are being there. But just making sure that there's that balance of, it's because, of course, sometimes one-to-one meetings need to be in person, but it's about trying to create that balance between that and when there needs to be larger team collaboration. So related as well to this empowerment thing, of course, is the critical importance in both hybrid teams as much as it is in in-person teams. We're never going to truly have effective organizations if we don't maximize the potential of our teams to lead. So that's not just the individuals, but the team itself. The longer they remain dependent on their line manager, the longer there's missed potential. So what's really critical in these hybrid teams, and particularly because of the nature of the hybrid team with a lesser in-person contact, and as Bell and Kozlowski have mentioned, potential dispersal, of course, of people across quite wide geographical areas, distributing leadership is particularly important. So, of course, it comes back to leading by output rather than micromanaging. It comes back to, actively working to see how can you give people more autonomy, more freedom, more control over their work, that you're able to distribute leadership responsibility. And it's a win-win for people around the team, okay? The other thing, of course, from some of the very few pieces of research, I think Kev mentioned at the beginning, there's not a lot of research around hybrid teams or even virtual or remote teams, the things that were increasingly common before the pandemic. But some interesting research was done by Eisenberg et al. And of course, I mean, this is common sense stuff, isn't it? Team members understand what their dependencies are between themselves and what their coordination needs are much better than the leaders that that aren't there in the thick of things, or at least they know as well as we do. They do absolutely have a huge amount to contribute around their suggestions and ideas about how they can do things better. So it's really important that they're empowered to make changes or make suggestions and so on. This is also really important is that hybrid teams are only going to be successful when they trust each other. And when they trust each other, so when team members, because they built a relationship between each other, they know each other as people, they're getting to know each other as people, as human beings, rather than just a face behind a screen. What that does is it increases their bonding, their ability to collaborate, and therefore enables shared leadership to emerge in those kinds of hybrid teams. And to do that, now talks about the importance of creating opportunities to build relationships in person. I'm going to come on to a bit more about that later on. And also, really important is about dealing with conflict quickly. And I know Steve's got some great examples of that from Hounslow as well. But conflict in hybrid teams must be dealt with quickly because it will have even more of an impact, arguably, than in-person teams because of the fact that, things can simmer and be not seen necessarily for much, much longer. So it's really, really important. Then related to distributing leadership, ask yourself if all the meetings that you're attending as a line manager really need you there, or whether, like with our in-person teams, there are more things that you could upskill people to take off of your desk. That again, it's that win-win between you being able to be more strategic as a leader, or your leaders being able to be more strategic, and their people getting that enrichment from having greater responsibility. And then the other thing to think about is, making sure, being conscious to create time to build human connections with people. So, for example, making sure that meetings don't just start immediately being task focused, but actually just like, when you go to a meeting in person and if you're there a few minutes early, you get a chance to, or even if you're arriving on time, you typically get a chance to sort of have a little chat, to sort of to kind of be yourself, be human before the business starts. The same thing needs to happen in hybrid team meetings too. We need to create the opportunity to build human connections. And also, as I mentioned before, this is really critical, of course, to enabling those water cooler moments, as ever precious water cooler moments, is that you're actually creating conditions for people to build relationships between themselves by actually getting together physically. So, I would really strongly pay attention to how much of your meetings are almost entirely task focused, or they start off task focused, and that's how they go on. The fourth theme is around engaging people and reducing stress by helping to ensure that work is efficient. This is really, really critical too. So people, because you've got a lot more meetings now working hybrid, the number of meetings that we have in our diaries, according to research by Microsoft, has grown exponentially because, of course, we're not traveling from place to place is one of the reasons for it. And we're often, despite, it being 2 or 3 years or 4 years since COVID, a lot of people, myself included, embarrassingly, still forget to put a break between meetings always. Try to remember, but then it's, so you might be rushing from one to another. We certainly have more meetings than we ever did before. So we've got to maximize the potential of those meetings. According to my research, people talked about the fact that the most successful hybrid leaders were ones who always ensured that meetings were well prepared for and that they were inclusive. So what they meant by well prepared for, they said, well, it's much more obvious now when we go into a hybrid meeting that isn't fully ready, or people aren't quite, the slides aren't there, or the agenda's not quite right, or people aren't fully prepared. It's much more obvious than it was in person, because in person, you could sort of like make a cup of tea, or just chat and things, and kind of provide a bit of cover time for the people organising the meeting. But they said it's really important to ensure that they're fully prepared. Of course, part of that is making sure the right technology is being used, but also that they're inclusive. And they talked about the fact that, unfortunately, of course, as again is can be the case in in-person meetings, meetings could be not inclusive in terms of who's invited to be there, but also in allowing certain people to dominate the meeting. That can happen just as much. So you need to be thinking about things like, what are the settings that you're all using on Microsoft Teams, because not everybody knows that there are different settings than or in Zoom too. There are different settings than you'll see on the main screen, the main speaker, and everybody else is kind of hidden. Or if you've got a bigger group and some people are on the second screen that you're not going to see, you need to be really conscious of thinking about that, because that's a great way to exclude people, and that's of no benefit to anybody. Encouraging breaks between meetings. I'm going to make a note of this myself for later on. Look at my diary. And we do have far too many that are back to back. So some organisations talked about that they had a rule where you had to, unless you were given an exceptional reason, you had to allow somebody half an hour break between one meeting and the next. 15 minutes would be good. And I used to think it was a bit rude, you know, when like organizations when you had a meeting with them and they sent you a Teams invite and it was just 45 minutes. I used to think, how rude. Or if you know, I don't, there's a thing, I've noticed a theme, particularly in American organizations, companies, where they only send you 30 minutes. And it's like, you know, okay, so you can eventually go, well, you know, am I not worth an hour or whatever it is? But it makes so much sense in reality that, you know, because you can get so much done in 45 minutes. It's not always going to suit, but the point is that there is definitely a case for saying, well, why are we naturally setting meetings at 60 minutes? Would 50 minutes do? Would 45 minutes do? Or whatever it is. The other thing is about encouraging team members to be in the right meetings, because of course, as people described in the research, there's, of course, as we all know, there's a tendency to add, you know, because it's so easy to add people to a meeting invite, to just send in a meeting invite to all and sundry, and not necessarily think consciously about people being in the right meeting. So it's that constant balance between, are we including people, but also are we saying this is not a mandatory meeting? This is something that, you know, actually the three of us can sort out, or we'll report back or whatever it is. So that's really, really important. And the other thing people talked about was the importance of providing the technology and using it. So different teams will have different activities they need to do, will have different preferences for technology. But, you know, there's lots of simple things now. And of course, since the pandemic, these online technologies have come on leaps and bounds. Are we making use of things like whiteboards? Are we making use of Teams chats? Are we making use of, you know, whatever platform it is that people, you know, will find beneficial to their work? And the other thing that's really critical to both engaging people and reducing stress, which is what this theme is about, is clarity of expectations. And again, this is very much an in-person team challenge as well. Really, really, really important thing for people to be conscious of is, are we always completely explicit about what we're expecting of people? It's so vitally important. And you know, we know this from you know decades of research, but Kwon and John did some really interesting research across the US Federal Service, where people had worked. They did it with thousands of people that worked for hybrid for a long time, very long time. I think it was a postal service, and they found that, surprise, surprise, people want to be supervised. It's not motivating when no one cares whether we achieve something or not. Satisfaction in work is correlated with having a performance-oriented culture. People do want to be supervised, so they do want you to set expectations. They do want you to monitor that. They do want you to, you know, to let them know when they're doing something well and when they've fallen short, and then support them to do it better. It's really, really important. And related to that, a major source of stress in remote working can be lack of goal or role clarity. So Nayani et al. Are some really great, you know, for a long time they've been researching remote teams. And you know, you can imagine if you're working remotely, then you've got even less exposure to yourself. So go say, is it, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Is that the right thing? Am I on the right lines? Versus, you know, when they're working hybrid, it might be more difficult to get hold of the line manager. They might not want to bother people. They might not want to look stupid. It's really important that, as far as possible, we are providing people with goal or role responsibility, role clarity, sorry, I should say. So a practical suggestion is that you whenever you're in, you know, assigning your team with a new activity or project or task, that you take a moment to actually check that they're genuinely clear about what you're expecting from them before they crack on and do it. You know, so start that culture of, you know, so is that 100% clear? And will you come back to me if you've got any questions? Rather than, right, here's a job, off you go. It's really, really important in all roles that we do that. Another thing that can be particularly stressful for all teams is blurred lines around where does one person's responsibility end and another one's begin. We've got to have clarity of expectations in teams. We've done lots of research, particularly in the health service, around high-performing multi-professional teams. And that clarity of roles and responsibilities is so critical to satisfaction, to motivation, to be able to innovate, to all the critical outcomes. And of course, it can also help when there's greater clarity of expectations, it can help to reduce this challenge around extensification that I mentioned earlier on. It can help people to understand, okay, I've done enough now. This is now something that I pass on to Cheryl or whoever it is. That they know that they've done their job because they know what's expected and they know what good looks like and they know that they've met it. So it's really important for job-related stress from that angle as well. So I hope this is useful to you. I'm on the final theme now, which is around the critical importance of enhancing well-being and collaboration by treating employees as human beings. And that is one of my favorite memes ever. So I hope you appreciate that one as well. I hope you like that one too. So again, sorry to repeat myself, but this is a major challenge in pretty much all organizations, is around the need to bring more humanity back into the workplace, to genuinely see people as human beings rather than as human doings. And it's the only way we're going to get stuff done in a more challenging world is to really bring that humanity back into our leadership. So what people talked about in the research was the importance of the leader proactively connecting with individual team members. So the most successful hybrid leaders were the ones that took the time to build up a personal relationship. They had relaxed communications with their team. I don't mean relaxed unprofessional, but they didn't always focus on tasks. They weren't a closed shop. They shared about themselves, and it didn't have to be a big deal. It just meant that their conversations, started about people. How are you? How are things for you? How's it going? Well, this week I'm working on. They shared and they asked. So they made sure that things were kept human. And then related to that, they reached out regularly to keep in touch with their direct reports. So more than they would have done or would have felt that they needed to if they previously worked if the team was previously in person. And of course, I know that, and you'll obviously know too, that the sectors that you tend to work at or that you work in are ones where hybrid working is something that's been around for decades, if not longer. So I'm not suggesting that this is something new, but for those that were working more in person, they felt that the leaders that were the most successful, the ones who were going out of their way even more than before to keep in touch with people, to find out how they're doing. And they don't leave it to the team member to contact them. The leaders that are most successful are proactively reaching out to their team members. And part of that proactive reaching out is helping to ensure that they're well. So it's asking them about how they're doing, how they're feeling, are they feeling overloaded? Is everything all right? Anything I can help with? Anything I can get someone else to help you with? They actually care about that person, as I said, as a human being. So they ask specifically about well-being. They also make sure that they're available when they're needed. So of course, all of us have got jobs to do that are beyond line management, that part of our job specifically. But they responded quickly. When people left them a message saying, I need to talk to you about something, they responded quickly. They didn't just leave it for ages. They also made sure that they were accessible. So what they did was they, for example, opened their diaries so people could see where they were. They weren't secretive about what they were doing. I'm always really suspicious of leaders that keep their diaries completely private or don't let people know where they are, because that's not a good way to build trust. It's just not a good way to build trust. And it sets a tone. You really do need to be as open as possible within reason around where you are if you want to be successful with running a hybrid team. And they also use the right communications at the right time. So they didn't always use email. They might, for example, have a disclaimer on their email saying, look, my preference is to work, it might be between 5 and 7 in the morning, the famous 5 o'clock club that you see all over Instagram. Not that I look on Instagram every night, but it could be the 5 o'clock, or it could be like that they are someone who prefers to work late into the early hours of the morning. Now, of course, wherever possible, you do need to try to schedule your emails not to go at that point of time. But the point is that you might not have the chance to respond until then. So people might not get a response from you that day. They might not get it till the next morning. But you will be responsive to them, and also that you don't always rely on email. So you pick up the phone when you can. You see people physically when you can. You make sure that because there's a huge continuum, isn't there, between face-to-face meetings and an email, and between them you've got phone calls, you've got video calls. There's a whole range of things that you can do that can make those communications more powerful, more enriching, because they're not just another email. So they use the right communications approach at the right time. Just padding out this theme a bit more, this communication, connection, and collaboration. Practical things to think about. I mentioned before, we've got to be coordinated if we're going to make our hybrid team successful. So think about how can you engage them to work out what is the best thing for them. Kwon and John, and also Dale et al. Remember I mentioned them at the beginning there, that very recent piece of research from Liverpool John Moores around wellbeing and hybrid work, that enabling and encouraging collaboration is essential, but also is providing the technologies and actually using them as well. So we've got to be enabling and encouraging collaboration. And something to think about is your office environment conducive to collaboration? Because if you don't have meeting spaces or enough meeting spaces, then are people going to be able to coordinate when they're in the office? Or will you end up with a weird situation where people are on their with their headsets in the office whilst collaborating in person? You've got to think about things like the physical setup of your office to make sure that it's possible. And linked to that, by the way, we need to be allowing people who want to work in the office to come to the office. So we need to be allowing space for them as well, even if we don't have space for everybody. So is your office environment conducive to people coming in when they need to and when they want to, is the key thing. And then the last thing on this slide is a related point that two different researchers have raised, which is so important, is that whether we believe in hybrid working, whether it's our own personal preference or not, we mustn't let that show, because what that does is it reduces people's job satisfaction. There might be an organisational policy that we work hybrid. There might be a departmental policy that we work hybrid. We as line managers can undermine that just through how we talk about it. So, we're working hybrid, but personally, I can't wait until we get back into the office. Or this hybrid stuff's a load of nonsense. God, I wish this did ever happen. Or whatever we say, whatever way, if we're negative about hybrid working, it makes those hybrid people who are working hybrid, which will probably be most of your team if you have a hybrid working policy in the organisation, it makes them feel less satisfied with their work. And there is a significant correlation between job satisfaction. I said that really fast, didn't I? There's a significant correlation between job satisfaction and performance. So if we reduce people's satisfaction with their work, then we're going to reduce their performance. But we're also going to reduce their commitment, their motivation, because they won't feel so comfortable. They won't feel like they can give their best. They won't feel that things are okay at work. We've absolutely got to be positive about it. The Dale et al. Study also found one of their key findings was that when managers were unsupportive of hybrid working, or they perceived that they weren't accepting of it, it negatively impacted people's well-being. It's a no-brainer, but it's not acceptable, and we've got to make a stand when we hear about people talking negatively about hybrid working with their teams that work hybrid. So my final slide, if anybody is still there, because I can't see you, but I'm assuming you are, and I'm joking, I can see the number of participants. My final slide is, I'm going to summarize, how do you create the conditions then for casual conversations or water cooler moments? So, as I mentioned before, the very beginning, there is no silver bullet for this. I'm going to bring in lots of different metaphors here. No silver bullet for the holy grail of being able to replicate water cooler moments. Because like I said, this is the thing that people were so most often are concerned about. And I can totally understand that. Of course, there's so much work gets done and so much knowledge sharing that happens informally. But there isn't one thing. There isn't, as much as, technology companies would like you to believe, there isn't one technology that's going to solve it for you. There isn't one, way of doing it. Again, it's going to be about different teams, different individuals, and different preferences. So just to summarize some suggestions for you. The first thing is what I mentioned before. You must support the development of personal relationships. The people aren't going to learn to trust, aren't going to, develop a relationship such that they want to pick up the phone, or that they want to send a little Teams message, or that they want to, do whatever it is that they want to do to speak to each other, or WhatsApp, or whatever it is. They won't do that if they don't know people. So you must create the opportunity for coordinated work. You must create the opportunity for the team to be together on a from time to time, so they can actually get to know each other. There's no substitute for physical contact. You need to, wherever possible, make that happen. And if you can't do that, and you can't do that often, at the very least, engineer so that meetings aren't just about the task, they're not just about the work. Okay, so just make sure that, you might take, for example, have there's I think it's a Scandinavian thing someone told me about, where there's a tradition of the first 15 minutes of a meeting, or first 10 minutes, it has to be about the people. So how are you? What have you been up to? What's something that you've achieved recently? It's about them. It's not getting straight into the work. So you might agree with your team that it needs to be as strict as that, because it can be very difficult when we're under pressure and we're under stress to get stuff done. It can be very difficult not to be task focused. So you might need to think of a hard and fast rule like that. But that coordinated work, that meeting is not just being about work, and as when you can, getting together physically. Provide and encourage use of technology that suits your team. I mentioned this before, that's really, really important. Ask them what will work for them, get them to explore different things that are available for them to use, that the organisation might have, or they might find as part of a license or something they didn't know that they had. What is it that they can agree about how they prefer to communicate with each other? Encourage frequent communication across the team. People might, for some reason, have the impression that you want them just to get on with the job and stop chatting, or stop doing these things. And it's about the balance again, isn't it? Because of course we don't want people chatting all day about, whatever they're doing at the weekend, or the shop, whatever it is. But you would need to be encouraging it. You just try and find out what, how do people feel about having those kind of conversations in your team, or with the line managers that you lead. And it can be really useful to role model that too, that you make the effort to communicate yourself frequently with the team. You're not shut away in your home office, or perhaps you're in the office. But that encouraging communication is really, really critical as well, to enable those casual conversations. Supporting new starters is really, really important. Building that network by helping to coordinate time spent together between new starters and more experienced people is really critical, because there's that knowledge sharing. And again, the stronger the links, the more people get to know each other as people, the more likely they are to be able to have those casual learning conversations and casual sharing conversations. We would also really encourage you to role model yourself, starting human conversations. So make sure that you're talking about yourself appropriately in the workplace, and that you're asking about people, as mentioned before. That's also part of this, achieving this holy grail, is you role modeling, having human conversations with people. And then finally, scheduling time for learning together. Again, this is something that came out really strongly from our multi-professional teams research, is that you absolutely need to create learning opportunities, because that, again, is part of the building trust. If people can say what went well, what didn't go so well, what they've learned from it, if they can bond over, challenges and opportunities, adverse situations and successes, again, that is really, really important for building those human relationships. That's going to lead them to be much more likely to reach out in a casual way to talk to each other. So that's really, really important. People talk about things like lunch and learn sessions. They talk about, any successful team needs to get together regularly to learn from each other, even if that's virtually. It doesn't have to be. Remember, none of this has to be necessarily in person. even if they get together virtually at a set time every week, every 2 weeks, every month, to learn together, that has huge, benefits in building those relationships, increasing learning, both formal and informal. So if you do all of those things on that particular list, then, and also, of course, the other things as much as you can too, that is ultimately how you create those green shoots of those casual conversations, and which hopefully will become trees. Anyway, I'm going to hand over now to Kev, but thank you ever so much, those of you who are still here. People, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Juliette, for a really insightful presentation. Some key things for me were really that proximity bias and really making sure that obviously we're not falling into that, and actually just because we don't see people doesn't mean that obviously they're not there, they're not important, they're not valued and working. Really considering our views, our values, and how we work within that agile world. Again, really considering what the evidence says rather than what we believe to be the case. And I think the greatest thing was that our organizations are made up of human beings, not human doings. Fantastic statement. So what I'll do now, we are going to go into breakout, and it'll give us opportunity to consider what we've heard from Juliette, to think about our own practice around leading hybrid teams, share maybe some examples or some of the challenges that we experience, and also think of what we can do then to improve our approach to positive hybrid work. And we'll have about 10 people in a group, and I'll invite Manar to set the groups up now. And again, if we could nominate a speaker within the group just so we can have some feedback when we come back into the main room, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kev. The rooms are ready. We're going to have
Brilliant.
about 8 to 9 people in each room. So I'm just opening them now.
Excellent.
And
Thank you,
you, as our guest speakers and chair, will stay in the main room, but you have the ability to move between rooms as you need to. So if you wish to join some of the rooms, some of the conversations, you're more than welcome to do so. It will take about 20 seconds. Thank you, Kev.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant. Welcome back, everybody. Hope that gave you an opportunity to reflect on the information provided by Juliette, but also on your own experiences. It would be really good to have some time to discuss some of those reflections and the discussions you had in the breakout room. So again, if someone would like to raise the hand or put something in the chat, we'll be able to monitor the chat as well if there are any questions. So is there any volunteers who would like to feedback what the group discussed?
Kev, I'm just jumping in.
Sorry?
I don't think everyone is out of the breakout.
Oh, if no one...
I think
we got some people lost.
They're coming back in now. You can see the numbers flying up.
There must be a delay. Yes, apologies. I can only see 35 people in the main room, but now it's rising. The numbers are rising.
See.
There you go.
Right. So a few more coming in.
Yep.
Everyone. Brilliant. Well, I think we're at capacity now. Sorry, apologies. We did have some people back in the room and some had come through a bit later. So apology for that. I was just saying, hopefully to give you a good opportunity to reflect on what you'd heard from Juliette, but also to consider that within the context of your own organisation, obviously your own practices around leading hybrid teams. I did ask you to nominate a spokesperson. So again, if any of the spokespeople would please like to share what you discussed within your group. Otherwise, if you want to share any questions in the chat, and we'll be able to pick up any of those. So I've got Sharon's raised a hand.
I'll get it out of the way because my team nominated me to do the speaking. And I came into this meeting, this seminar. I'm not going to put my hand up. I'm not going to talk, but clearly I have failed miserably. But Juliette, thank you for the presentation. Absolutely excellent. And I think most of us have been through all of those scenarios in some shape or form. But in terms of kind of our reflections on a personal level, there was something for me about being firm. It was just a thing that really kind of resonated with me around kind of being clear and being firm about what our expectations are. are. And I think we all had different experiences in terms of some comments about command and control, particularly within some of our NHS organisations and how they operate, but also when a change of leadership came about that was less about command and control. Actually, the whole atmosphere and ways of working changed, and kind of that productivity or positive experience for people was coming out loud and clear. And then we had a bit of a conversation about, we talked about, it shouldn't be about age, it's probably about experience, but kind of for younger people who are coming into the workplace. For some people, hybrid working will be all they've ever known, kind of stuff. For those of us who have who have done that, traveling and been in the office, and you know, and I think there is sometimes a bit of a rub. I personally, I hear it from people, you know, well, in my day when I had to come to work and sort out my childcare, and there is a bit of a rub, I think, between workers who have worked the old way and working the new way, kind of stuff. But I think some of it's about that consistency of approach, really. I don't know if anyone from my team wants to offer up anything. If I've covered it, I'm going to take that as a yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sharon. Juliette, have you got any responses to Sharon's questions or feedback?
No, I mean, I think that's, I mean, I'm really glad that you found it useful, and thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, we've got to see the end of command and control. We've got to get it out of organisations. It doesn't benefit anybody in any scenario, other than when there's active fire. But
yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think Stephanie was next with a hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I also got nominated to do the feedback for our group. Just say, yeah, thank you for a really insightful presentation. I guess we were just all a bit like trying to take it in because there was a lot of information there, and I suppose I was just reflecting on the fact, like, so I suppose in my role, I came into a new post about 6 months ago, and I'm kind of just trying to get into the team and understand how it functions and think about how to best support the working environment there. But I guess I was just more struck really when you talked about the onboarding point, you know, and the importance of that, because I think in some ways coming into starting a job in a hybrid world, it's been harder doing that onboarding, and I've definitely had feedback in previous roles where people have struggled to get into a role. A few of the other bits, I mean, we talked about the fact that we probably employed a lot of the techniques that maybe were suggested around having those weekly team meetings, but the importance, like you'd suggested, about it being about the human aspects of it rather than the just the doing aspects of it. I think we reflected, well, I certainly did, both from the team I've been in and ones previous, that it's hard around those expectations, because I think in some ways the fact that the dog might need a haircut hasn't been challenged across the organisation, so then it becomes almost the norm and that's accepted. So it'll be interesting perhaps at some point to commit to having a discussion with our team on that. And I was just describing the difficulties in trying to get people together, but we've managed to get an away day for December, so fortunately, well, we'll hopefully be able to chat through some of those bits there. Just picking up on other bits that colleagues said. Talked about the proximity bias, because we thought that was really accurate and well highlighted. And I think it was Brian who was in our group mentioned about the fact that I suppose there's proximity, I suppose, in terms of the established relationship you have with someone, because you do tend to reach out to people you're more familiar with anyway, but then also that proximity as to when you're in the office and spatially not being near someone. So there's probably different ways to reflect on how it affects our working environment and how we contact people. I thought it was just really helpful reminder though, because we all get so busy, don't we, that we forget to do some of that assertive, like checking in with people and making sure they're all right. So that was a really good prompt for me to stop being like, just head down, I've got a holiday coming up next week. So that's where, you know, you're trying to get everything done, aren't you? But we need to stop and really contact people and make sure they're okay. And then I think the other bit we talked about as well is about sometimes it's difficult managing that teamwork in a hybrid world as well. When you're kind of part of multiple teams, because different teams require different things of you. So yeah, I'm just wondering, looking at my notes, is there anything anyone else from our group wanted to chip in? They're very welcome to. I mean, Teams isn't going away, so we've got to find a way, haven't we, to kind of not be hampered by that kind of feeling of fragmentation that we can get. But there was so much to digest, and yeah, thank you very much. Going to go away and try and think about what it means in the context of our workplace.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephanie, for those insights and reflections. We've got Claire also with a hand up.
Hi, thank you very much. We were room 2 breakout. We brought a lot of our own personal experience into the conversation, really. We talked quite a bit about fairness and how it feels to be the person who's always in the office versus the person who's not. For some of us on the call with an ops background, we see the very difference between ops running around reactive and those who are in corporate teams who are not, and some of the concerns and unfairness that can come from that. For me, a little bit about concern from external regulators continually criticising leaders on visibility and how that is something that we need to manage better if we are not in the room, and is critical really from the CQC NHSE software programme. Visibility of leaders is absolutely paramount, so that I think has been compromised quite considerably. We considered what would make this better, and I think we struggle a lot with clear expectations, being really clear about what we expect from people, and hence the confusion and the anxieties that come around some always in the office, some not. The robustness of the policies and procedures that sit behind that, which can sometimes be a little bit woolly. And the bravery, that's the word we used, the bravery to challenge when that is not working. And I think that's, again, a sign of good leadership to be able to have that conversation. We looked at proximity bias, not so much from the angle that you mentioned, Juliette, in that by seeing people, they have greater opportunity. They also get the tough jobs because they are there. And I can speak with 30 years of ops leadership. That's what happens. So proximity bias can work very much against people as well as for. So I think we just need to consider both angles of that. We looked at the necessity to develop creativity. We're in great challenging times for transformation, for ideas, for financial balance, and that comes with people being together and bringing ideas together. And we are struggling to do that. So we are probably losing opportunity across the health economy to generate that, because we work like we are today with people in small boxes. So we're not generating perhaps that ideation that we get by sitting in a room together. We talked a bit about on-site meetings and how we need to improve that. We can all sit in a room on various screens, so we may as well not be there. Although in the olden days, we might have been on the phone to somebody, but we were still in the office together. I think our technology makes us look more insular. So I think we probably need to think about how we manage that. We also talked about meetings and what are formal, what are informal. And although our diaries can appear to be clustered full of Teams meetings, actually, are they just conversations? And I would argue that many of them are. I think they're just conversations that we are not having in a room. There are conversations we are not having in the corridor, or we're not having in a meeting space to generate the information we need for the more formal forums that we're attending. So yeah, we had all sorts of goodies in our little session, and thank you for generating the thought process for us.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Again, looks like it's been a really productive conversation in your group and some great insights again for us to consider. Lastly, I'll hand over to Emma.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I didn't make any notes at all. I don't know if anyone from my room wants to butt in. But actually, a question sort of building on from what Claire just said, who gave a great summary, by the way. I can't even try and match that. But we did talk about similar things. But I was just wondering, from a sort of meeting productivity point of view, you know, we all sort of moan that there's too many meetings, and since the introduction of Teams and the explosion of meetings, that there's too many. What as an organisation can we kind of do about that? Because, you know, I'm only in control of so many meetings, and they're kind of having breaks. Is obviously, we all know if we do that, we're going to be more productive, have better meetings, have better working days, but you're only in control of so much of your diary. So I was just wondering if there's anything from from that sort of wider perspective that you know of that people have introduced that can kind of address some of that message. But I really like Claire's point actually about that conversation, and some of it isn't meetings, it's about having those informal chats, which is really important. But yeah, I guess it's just some of that wider culture around meetings that perhaps we can look at, or if that's a whole nother presentation.
Brilliant. Again, Juliette, you want to respond to Emma's question?
That's a really good question. I think that it's always important to question how much control you've got, because you might be surprised, you know, or it might be that there are conversations that you can have with people that put you more in control. You explain, look, this is the reason why this is challenging for me. Can we stop doing it this way? Could we do it this way instead? So I would, with anything, I would always ask people to start by questioning their own assumptions about what they don't have control over. And of course, there will be things that you don't have control over. Of course, that's true for everybody. So again, it comes down to, I would say, trying to encourage more of a sort of agreed ways of working and policies. I don't know what you thought about the things I mentioned in the presentation about questioning whether all meetings need you there, and sort of trying to, if you're in a leadership role, trying to delegate more around people representing you where appropriate. Obviously, we know there are people who delegate because they can't be bothered to do their leadership role, but assuming that, you know, I would imagine that for most leaders, because we're so busy, we've probably got some room for better delegation to our colleagues. And I don't just mean delegation, I can't be bothered to do that, but actually I really, you know, this person wants to grow in that way. So definitely, that's what people have definitely put in place, is some of that. And then, like I said, some of the things around, you know, making sure that we're not inviting people to meetings willy-nilly, or, you know, just because we can, or just because they might be interested, in not having a culture of expectation that you go to every meeting you're invited to. I think it's a combination of things, Emma. I would say it's really it's challenging, because, like, you know, Claire made some, you know, Claire and the other people that spoke made some excellent points. You know, that sometimes they, you know, it looks like a meeting, it's actually a really important conversation. I would I would also, I think that one of the key things that a number of people maybe think of when they've been talking about what they reflected on is, you know, making sure that everybody in your environment knows what pulls there are on your time. I don't know if we communicate enough about all the other demands on us. So if we belong to multiple teams, if we have multiple hats, if we, you know, have been asked to do certain things by our line manager and above. Again, that, you know, I don't think we can communicate enough to other people about what's going on in our world. And I think a combination of those different factors, well, not I think, but I know a combination of different factors is what people use in reality to try to get on top of, as much as they can, the excessive meeting situation. I don't know if that's helpful, but I hope that there may be one thing in there that's useful for you.
Brilliant. Sorry, just one last question from Sharon again before we move on.
It's not really a question, Juliette. It was just a kind of a comment about the control things that I think, and about what we have control over. So I'm really about my own diary. So, and I do like the technology. So I think in terms of Microsoft, so some of the things that I've done is on a Monday, I have a non-meeting day. So basically it says in my diary, unless it's urgent or it's appointment, but what it does allow, though, is that if there is something really urgent, there is some space in my diary on a weekly basis to put something in. I also put in things like a lunch break, a 30-minute. I don't always take the lunch break, but it's about, and it's demonstrating to other people the importance of doing that. But I just use the technology. It does it automatically for me, but it helps put in some space and demonstrates, actually, I'm not available, you know, 7 hours for back-to-back meetings, and it does focus time as well, sort of thing, and I can actually use that when I want to focus on things. It's little tips. It doesn't work for everyone, depends on organizations, and I'm dead flexible. People put stuff in my focus time, in my lunch time, but actually it's helpful to for me to have some control over my diary when everyone can see it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juliette, for your fantastic presentation, for colleagues for engaging in the breakout rooms, and also those who fed back. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce now Stephen Walker-Whitehead, who will talk about his experience in the hybrid world. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Kev. Thank you so much. Hope everyone can hear me. So lots of stuff from this morning that's really resonated with me. I think particularly the stuff around bringing humanity into the workplace has been my life's mission in every role that I've ever done. So really pleased to see that having some prominence of consideration in the hybrid working context and that really person-centered stuff. Just on the casual conversations, my leadership team, and it's a really useful thing to do, every time we meet, we have 5 minutes on a thing. And last week it was, how do you cook your roast potatoes? So a bit random, but very interesting. And certainly you get to know about people, things that you didn't know before. Mine were the best, by the way, of course. So firstly, I'm Steve Walker-Whitehead. I'm the Director of People Equality and Organisational Development at the London Borough of Hounslow, and a real pleasure to be here talking to you all today. So I started as an interim in August 2019, as I think Kev mentioned, and then started the Culture Change Programme with my Chief Executive and didn't want anybody else to have a piece of that. So I decided to apply for the permanent role and was very lucky to be appointed to it. And I'm going to spend some time, values have been mentioned already today, I'm going to spend some time talking about how we developed our values later, what they are, the narrative that sits underneath them. But I think it's really important because I don't think we would have been able to be as progressive an organisation as I think we have become had we not got that foundation piece in that context, and had our people, importantly, not wanted to really bring those values to life. So I'm going to spend a little time on that. I do want to say I am indebted to Juliette. We were lucky enough to participate in the research. You've seen the outcome of some of that research this morning, and we used the Hybrid Team 360-degree dimensions tool, which basically looks at a lot of stuff that obviously Juliette has presented this morning, but just to go through those dimensions because they're really, really important. It's about mutual support and confidence, resilience and adaptability, innovation and improvement, psychological safety and learning, I'll come on to that a bit, communication and inclusion, inter-team collaboration, picking up on the point that Stephanie made, in fact, in terms of different teams needing different things from you, and how does that all work in this context, clarity of planning, and of course the leadership context as well. So that dimensions tool really enabled 4 of our teams to deep dive into those issues and what demonstrates good leadership and good collaboration across that. And from that, we were able to spread the learning across the whole organisation. So Juliette was particularly attentive, I would say, in helping us to do that. So I'll try not to repeat everything that Juliette has presented already, but kind of take it as read that in Hounslow, we're trying to do all of that with varying degrees of success, of course. But rewind now, that was a more recent piece of work. Rewind now to 2018, and Hounslow Council left its old civic centre, which was a very traditional office kind of structure and infrastructure, and moved to our new town hall, which is called Hounslow House. Really good collaborative spaces for working, really lucky. At that point in time, we also, I wasn't here, but we also moved to what was called the Work Smart programme. So we gave people the kit that enabled them to work virtually, remotely, flexibly. And the expectation at that point in time was that people would have 3 days in the office and 2 at home. I think we got the tech absolutely right in terms of people being able to do that work from home. What we didn't have in such a strong position was the ability to have virtual meetings in the way that we do now. So although the remote working bit worked, the hybrid working bit wasn't quite successful. Notwithstanding that, we had a really good technology foundation to work upon and improve come lockdown, and when obviously people couldn't come into the office. Just before the pandemic, we started the work that I've mentioned on the Culture Change Programme, and my chief executive gave me 3 requirements of me, I guess, in terms of that work. One was that he wanted to see change from the ground up. He wanted everyone's voice to be equal, and he wanted me and my team to reach everybody through that conversation, which was a really tall ask. I mean, all of those 3 things are tall orders, to be honest, but very exciting at the same time. So we were in the office, obviously working the 3 days in, 2 days out. So we did do some virtual stuff in terms of developing that conversation. But importantly, we recruited 60 culture change champions who were responsible for taking the conversation through the organisation in a really meaningful way. They attended team meetings, they hosted conversation hubs, they developed World Cafe style events as well, and developed workshops across our sites that aren't Hounslow House, so our care homes, sheltered housing, the depot and those sorts of places. So really tried to reach everybody, and staggeringly, we did manage to reach 80% of our 2,400 people, which I'd never experienced the like in my whole career in terms of an engagement exercise. And through that, we asked people, but the conversations were principally predicated on 2 building questions in terms of what's good about now, what's been good in the past, and 2 more aspirational questions. What do we need to be so successful for our residents in the future? What sort of culture do we want to see? So that was the basis of the conversation. Reached that 80% of our 2,400 workforce. There was a lot more engagement, further sprints to develop the behaviours. We had 9 prototype values and we got them down to 5. Long story short, we wanted those values to really reflect the language that we'd heard our people using, not just as reflected in the values as we developed them, the 5 that we landed with, but also in the narrative that sits between them that I mentioned before. And that, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read out to you. So Christina, would you mind going to slide 2 of my slide deck, please?
I will.
Slightly embarrassing, I'm not doing it myself, colleagues, but I'm very unfamiliar with Zoom. So these are the values that drive everything we do. These are the values that we developed off the back of that whole organisation conversation. And I just wanted to read the narrative that, as I said, brings it to life, because I think it's really important and stood us in really good stead in terms of embracing a hybrid world of work. So lead with heart. We're here for the people of Hounslow. We work together with them and for them, with care and compassion, with patience and in partnership. We put ourselves in others' shoes, remembering that every person is different and every interaction is a real moment in their lives, and we always feel first. In terms of do new, we need to do things differently if we're going to help Hounslow people thrive in the future. Hard work is important, but it's not enough on its own. We need to challenge ourselves to break new ground, invent new approaches, try new ideas, keep moving forward and keep improving. That means being ready to stop doing things we have done before. It means taking a risk and backing each other when we take a leap. In terms of pass on the power, the world keeps on changing and we need to change with it. We won't be able to adapt fast enough to the future needs of our residents if we stick to old-fashioned command and control. That expression again, we've heard it multiple times already today. We need to hand over responsibility and give people the power to make decisions and take action themselves. It's about being transparent and straightforward. It's about providing tools and support. But most of all, it's about being ready to trust each other, that word again, to do the right thing. In terms of harness the mix, we work together across disciplines and roles. We talk lots, share our insights, our skills and experience. We're not interested in silos or defensiveness. We're always open to different approaches. We're flexible and ready to adapt. We break down the barriers between our parts and people to unlock the problem-solving power of our amazing mix of minds. And lastly, be a rock. There's lots to do and people need us. It's up to us to take the initiative, to take responsibility, to stand up and be counted every day. It's about being super focused, effective and efficient. It's about allocating our resources smartly and with good rationale, using data to guide our decisions. But most of all, it's about having the strength and determination to keep on going through thick and thin. So that was the foundation piece for how we moved forward into this new world. And please bear in mind that we did introduce the values. We launched them through lockdown. So they had a particular resonance with how we were having to work at that time, particularly in terms of leading with heart, given people's sometimes really, really challenging personal circumstances, but equally in terms of passing on the power. But how do we harness the mix in this new world, doing new in terms of how we work differently, but always and relentlessly being a rock for our residents? So that was the kind of moment in time when we launched. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So we've been very clear that people should come in with purpose. We've never mandated a particular number of days for any of our people. Obviously, our frontline staff are impacted slightly differently because of the nature of their work. But we do talk about coming in with purpose, and I'll explain a very tangible example of what I think that is a little later in this presentation. There's been a significant emphasis, as Juliette's mentioned, on self-management in terms of developing team charters together for how we work, developing tools that support leaders and teams to make meetings matter and to ensure that they're really inclusive. We've got a whole suite of stuff for people that we're welcoming into the organisation, which is available electronically, I should say. But that, of course, supplements the very important in-person welcome to Hounslow that we provide to all of our joiners and career changers. All things that I'm sure that you have in place in your organisation to support leaders in their critical relationship with their teams and individuals. What I wanted rather to focus on, because I think truly and firmly the very best organisations will look at developing interventions corporately and organisation-wide that enable an infrastructure that supports all the stuff we've been talking about this morning. So the first thing that we looked at in terms of landing the values across our strategic and operational people management and development practice was performance and development, and essentially how we manage our people. So with the launch of the values, we abandoned what was our very traditional approach to performance appraisal, the annual appraisal with a 6-month review. People under those circumstances, in some circumstances, were performance managed and had a development conversation, but twice a year, clearly inadequate. We introduced monthly check-in conversations, not least to provide our people with goal and role clarity that Juliette's mentioned, and those goals being real-time or near-time rather than something that's 12 months hence, because that's really not terribly useful. Massive focus on people's well-being, particularly important as we launched this through the pandemic and when people were genuinely struggling to balance work and life with all sorts of other challenges that awful time brought for all of us. So a real emphasis on well-being, learning in a new context with less face-to-face kind of interaction. Important that we substitute that with online resources, workshops, whole organisation question and answer sessions with our chief executive, and also collaborative platforms for people to get together in a more informal way. So we use Viva Engage, the Microsoft product for that. Living the values, people explore through these conversations, of course, how well they're able to live the values and whether they experience them lived elsewhere across the organisation, particularly in regard to leadership, and providing regular and timely feedback, really, really important in a hybrid world more than ever, I think. And Juliette's mentioned appreciating contributions and achievements and going out of our way as leaders to notice when people do really great things, because our people tend to do great things all of the time. And that's, of course, the stuff of the conversation, but it's also, we have a formal mechanism through the technology that we use, Clear Review, to facilitate these conversations, to provide more formal feedback to anyone across the organisation, which is really helpful and really appreciated by people. So that was the organisational approach to managing people, shifted very significantly and in the right way to take account of the hybrid world. On the next slide, I just want to talk very briefly about something again that's been mentioned this morning, but a very practical different way of dealing with unhappiness in the workplace and dealing with conflict as well, which again, Juliette mentioned, because it can become even more hidden. It's hidden anyway, very often in organisations, even when we're all together in the office. It's even more hidden potentially in a hybrid world. So we really needed to give it our attention. And we found, obviously, that our traditional grievance and disciplinary performance absence procedures were entirely out of step with our values. So we wanted to do something completely different. So we did away with all of those policies, and we've introduced what is called a resolution framework. And there's a short video that I'd be really grateful if we could play. I think it's on the slide after that one.
Experiencing conflict at work is never easy. It makes us uncomfortable, unhappy, and unproductive. But when people with different passions and priorities under different pressures work together, we won't always agree. Conflicts are inevitable. We might upset each other or behave in ways that are out of step with our standards. We're human. We've been thinking about the kind of organisation we want to be. We know that, all too often, our grievance and disciplinary procedures don't deliver the kind of resolutions we would all hope for. We felt the tension this can cause, and we heard you when you said you wanted things to change. So we're changing our disciplinary and grievance procedures and launching a new resolution framework, as we believe there's a better, more human way to resolve conflict. One that allows us to grow and learn as individuals and as teams, and helps us to feel happier and more supported as we do. A framework that helps us to change our behaviours, that can change how we feel at work, that reminds us of the standards we all need to achieve, instead of warning us when we miss the mark, and has our values at its heart. By talking to each other openly and honestly, we can nip issues in the bud, preventing misunderstandings and clearing the air before tensions mount. From simple coaching to full mediation, our resolution framework will help us to navigate difficult conversations. And, of course, in most serious situations, we will continue to follow a robust formal procedure to uphold our high standards. How we behave at work and how we feel at work matters. And with the support of our new resolution framework, we can all find better ways to work together and serve our residents. For more information, go to our resolution framework intranet pages.
Thank you. I really like that. Really proud of that. And that was one of our team actually that did the voiceover, who's a complete amateur, but I think she's found her calling in life, Asia. So really, we want to avoid people getting locked into formal procedures that make nobody happy whatsoever. And so we've done away with warnings, as you will have heard. We have reminders for people now if there's minor misconduct. Since we launched in June, we've not had a single grievance formalised, which is just brilliant. It has changed the culture so significantly, and it really fits with how we're working at the moment as well, because things are much more easily surfaced in a way that they possibly wouldn't be in the old days, I mean, doing things as we've always done before, relying on our statutory obligation. Obviously, some of those interventions clearly need to happen in person, and that's an important thing. The coaching, ideally, certainly facilitated conversations, which is one of the other routes to resolution, of course, and mediation. Really important that we get the balance right in terms of the hybrid context and have that face-to-face interaction when we experience unhappiness or conflict. So I just wanted to give an example of where I think it's really important that people become, we are a place-based organisation, we're a geography, we're a place leader, and it's really, really important that people, all of our people are rooted in Hounslow. So although we've not mandated days, we are very clear, the being firm thing, about the sorts of things people need to be in the borough for. And the example that I wanted to share with you today of that is the delivery of our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, which I have the privilege of leading here in Hounslow in terms of creating a fairer, more equal Hounslow. We've developed the strategy on the basis of 3 pillars. One looks at, and most excitingly for me, looks at equality by place, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Equality by group, of course, protected characteristics, and equality as an employer. We're a major employer, as all of your organisations probably are too. in the geographical location in which we reside. So it's really important that we're exemplar in terms of inclusion, equality, and diversity. So on the equality by place, through the wealth of data being a rock, using evidence to guide our decisions, we were able to identify our 30 most deprived, unequal neighbourhoods. We've clustered those into 10 now to make the task a bit more manageable. And not only are we driving council and partner resources into those areas in terms of service provision and particularly preventative work, we're also tethering those areas that we've identified to regeneration programs or housing developments so that we can really harness the social value that they bring in terms of not least employment, education and skills, and better health outcomes for our residents and communities. So really important piece of work. We recognise absolutely acutely the importance of place, and we expect people to know our communities really, really well. So it's important in the context of this and in all sorts of other ways. I'm using this as an example because I lead the work, that we have face-to-face time with our residents. That's a non-negotiable. We need to understand whether what we are seeking to do on the basis of data equally matches their aspirations for themselves, their neighbourhoods and their communities. So critically important that we don't forget we're place focused. We don't forget that we serve the residents of Hounslow, and sometimes that means being in the borough and being in the borough often and feeling a real connection to it. So that's where we're firm. It's not everything up for grabs by any means. We do provide clarity on expectation, particularly around resident engagement. Moving on, I'll be quick with the next thing because I'm conscious of time. Taking people through transformation in a virtual hybrid world can present its own challenges. So what we've tried to develop is a conversation-based approach, actually a person-centered based approach to transformation, to organisation change, organisation design as it affects our people. So what we seek to do both in person and virtually, where that's a more inclusive opportunity, is really get people's good ideas from the coalface, from the front line around how we can deliver even better services for our residents, given our financial context and given the inequality that we see across the borough. So really at the front end of any change programme, getting those ideas. What we used to do in Hounslow, shamefully, was develop a proposal. We'd put it out for a statutory period of consultation. We probably wouldn't really listen to what our people told us. It would go out with a tweet to a job role name or something like that, but nothing too significant at all. And then we'd put everyone at risk of redundancy if there wasn't a matching job for them in the new structure. And then we'd make them reapply for their jobs. We don't do that anymore. It's not a fair way to treat people. And particularly if people are not even in the building, it really does make a difference doing things differently, given the hybrid context. So we don't have those interviews anymore. If people do become vulnerable to redundancy through organisational change, or we want them to change how they work, we have development conversations with them. We provide a jobs match service if they want to consider a career change, particularly important for us in terms of the struggle that we have recruiting people into social care. So we've got all sorts of apprenticeship routes to enable people to change profession, to change career into those really hard to recruit to areas. So I just wanted to mention that as we've not least developed that given the hybrid context and that sense of distance that can sometimes feature in that. Everybody's voice is important. Not everybody's voice is equal, but it's important, and we do listen much better through transformation through engagement than we did through our organisational change policy previously. Good, and lastly from me, it is a journey. Next slide, please. Although it's only a picture of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. We're certainly not at the butterfly stage yet, but we're getting there, I hope. And I just wanted to say that it's really important, obviously, to measure impact in a really meaningful way. And so we have twice now run a Delivered a My Experience Matters survey supported by Real World Group, which really gives a reflection from our people on our equality leadership competence, how inclusive we are, how well we're living our values, as well as giving the opportunity for qualitative feedback too. So we are constant, and we have seen a positive shift in terms of people's experience. Marginal, can't be complacent, still a way to go to get up to those strongly agree responses to the statement questions that we ask. But we that taken together with our EDI action planning, really important that we keep on this journey, and really important that we keep on the journey given the context of how we're working at the moment in this hybrid world. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stephen, for that really insightful look into the work that you're doing at Hounslow. I'll invite colleagues to raise their hand or use the chat if they've got any questions for Stephen. Anybody, any questions for Stephen in relation to the work that they're doing, or some wider questions relating to hybrid working and you know, how we can be effective within our own processes around effective working? No? Okay, great. As I say, please do bob some questions in the chat if you do have any questions, and we'll get them as they come through. If there aren't any immediate questions, I would just like to again thank Juliette and Stephen for those really insightful presentations into hybrid and agile working. Really reassuring that we have people such as Juliette looking at this from an academic perspective and really developing some of the evidence base around hybrid and agile working, and that people such as Stephen are really pioneering this within the workplace as well. So really reassuring that that work is going on. And I think it's really important that we obviously all take some time to reflect how we operate as organizations, how we are moving through that transformation of working differently, and how we essentially support our organizations to do the best we can for our people. Just a quick reminder that our next masterclass is on the 22nd of November, where we'll be looking at how a better evidence-based approach can help support local authorities and the public sector to meet their challenge. All the materials will be shared in the coming days, and there is also an evaluation slide. So again, if you could please take some time to complete the evaluation, that really helps with us developing future sessions. Obviously, your feedback is really important in relation to the usefulness of the session, what you found really useful, and if there is anything else that you would like to see going forward. So again, just one more time, if there are any questions for Stephen or Juliette before we close. No, I think we're okay for questions. So again, thank you very much for everyone for attending. We hope that it's been really useful and you've taken away some useful insights to consider back at the workplace. And again, thank you to Juliette, Stephen, and also the team operating breakout rooms and slides in the background. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.